Opening the queenside flank creates immediate space and potential for queenside expansion, challenging black's central ambitions early. Challenging white's flank advance, this central pawn strike immediately contests key squares and opens lines for development. Developing the bishop to this square initiates a strategic pressure along the long diagonal, potentially supporting a future pawn push or aiming at black's undeveloped queenside. Sacrificing the pawn offers a tempo to develop, but opens lines towards the king prematurely. Sacrificing piece development for material is a risky gamble that leaves your king exposed. Developing the knight to its natural square now contests the bishop's dominance and prepares for castling. Establishing territorial dominion and preparing to expand queenside influence. Securing the monarch now prioritizes king safety, a prudent decision given the looming central pawn tension. Developing a knight to its natural outpost, white prepares to contest the center and secure their king. Challenging white's pawn structure and opening the center, black aims to disrupt the bishop's pressure and potentially free their pieces. Solidifying the center and preparing for development, this aims to prevent black's queenside expansion while reinforcing white's pawn structure. Developing the bishop here safeguards the king and prepares to challenge white's central pawns. Re-establishing pressure on the queen's bishop's diagonal, a patient repositioning to control more of the board. Challenging the central pawn structure directly, aiming to disrupt white's developing harmony and open avenues for counterplay. Retreating the bishop to its previous square allows black to consolidate their central pawns and continue their queenside development. Bringing the knight to c6 solidifies the pawn chain and prepares to contest the center, a crucial developing step. Opening the c-file now offers white a chance to press for central control. Reclaiming lost tempo, this knight firmly anchors itself in the center, challenging white's advanced pawn. Securing the king's safety is paramount, initiating a defensive maneuver as the center develops. Reclaiming the bishop offers flexibility, preparing for central pawn breaks and potentially opening lines toward white's king. Unifying queenside pieces for central pressure, while subtly reinforcing the d4 square's potential. Injecting the knight here creates immediate central pressure and eyes a potential fork on d3. Sacrificing the bishop opens a diagonal for your queen and disrupts black's pawn structure, offering attacking chances. Reclaiming the material with the queen immediately mobilizes your most powerful attacker, preparing to pressure white's kingside. Opening the c-file and challenging the knight's central outpost provides white with valuable attacking potential. Developing the bishop to f5 aims to challenge white's center control and prepare for future pawn advances. Opening up the file aims to pressure black's queenside, potentially disrupting coordination and creating new avenues of attack. The knight embarks on a surprising journey to the edge, aiming for the queenside influence. Initiating a strategic repositioning, the knight seeks the more active c6 square, aiming to control central squares and potentially support a queenside pawn push. A strategic retreat of the knight, aiming to reposition for greater influence on the queenside, though it concedes some queenside space. Securing the rook's active placement while reinforcing the queenside expansion is key here. Securing the c-file with the rook is a vital step towards challenging white's queenside control and opening attacking avenues. Unifying the rooks and bolstering the queenside is the aim, though it concedes the d-file's potential. The queen now eyes the queenside, aiming to pressure white's weakened pawn structure and potentially activate the rook. Repositioning the bishop to b5 pressurizes black's queenside pawn structure and opens lines for potential attacks. Shifting the queen away from the e-file opens up lines for white's rooks and potentially weakens black's king safety down the center. Asserting queenside space, white aims to leverage the open a-file and pressure black's underdeveloped pieces. Retreating the queen to d8 allows white to consolidate their queenside initiative and prepare further piece activity. Repositioning the rook to the b-file aims to challenge black's queen and potentially prepare further pressure along that open file. Finally, the knight finds a more active square, potentially eyeing c4 and offering some centralized pressure. Opening the d-file injects immediate dynamism, challenging black's cramped queenside and creating new attacking possibilities. Unleashing the c-file potential now opens lines, demanding a keen eye for tactical exchanges on the queen side. Reclaiming the central pawn allows white to consolidate and potentially pressure black's kingside. Exchanging queens simplifies the game, potentially favoring white's centralized knight and open files. Simplifying to an endgame, this centralizes your knight, eyeing weaknesses. Initiating development for the queen side and exploring potential pawn breaks further afield. Asserting pawn structure now forces black to decide the fate of their bishop pair, potentially freeing up white's queenside. Reorganizing the bishop to a safer outpost frees up the knight for central action. Reasserting central control, white prepares to contest the open d-file and hinder black's queenside mobility. Seeking to exploit white's cramped queenside knights, black aims to activate the trapped knight with this maneuver. Clearing the way for the rook, but it cedes control of central squares. Reclaiming the central file with the rook establishes crucial pressure and opens avenues for counterplay against white's exposed king. Initiating a queenside pawn raid to disrupt black's compact structure and gain free space. Reinforcing the queenside pawn structure aims to create a stable bastion against further white advances. Opening the center strategically, white aims to exploit the uncastled king and potentially create a passed pawn. Capturing the rook opens up the b-file for white's queen, creating immediate pressure. Reclaiming the pawn immediately solidifies white's material advantage, creating an open file for the rook that will dominate the board. Liberating that bishop from its pawn cage initiates a strategic pawn chain reevaluation. Initiating a calculated pawn push to seize control of central squares and disrupt black's knight coordination. Opening the kingside further, this move invites immediate tactical skirmishes and potential exposure for the king. Securing the crucial c-file offers white a clear path to pressure black's queenside pawns and potentially exploit their isolated position. Asserting central influence, the rook liberates the d-file for potential operations, ready to challenge white's pieces. Repositioning the knight aims to contest the crucial central squares and challenge black's piece activity. Attempting to shore up kingside weaknesses, but it potentially opens lines for the rook. King's safety is now severely compromised, opening lines for attack. Repositioning the monarch to safety is paramount, as the open c-file now threatens penetration. Sensing weakness, the knight probes the king's new, less defended sector. Securing the d-file for the rook initiates a strategic pawn race, aiming to exploit black's potentially exposed king. Breaching the pawn chain opens dynamic possibilities on the queen side, challenging black's coordination. Restoring structural integrity becomes paramount after the exchange, seeking to consolidate the remaining pawns. Asserting dominion over the file, the rook boldly advances, aiming to disrupt black's vulnerable king's safety. Seeking to exploit the newly opened queenside diagonal, this pawn advance boldly challenges white's queenside structure and aims to disrupt their coordination. Seizing the open file presents a clear opportunity to create positional pressure and disrupt black's structure. The bishop activates, eyeing the vulnerable queenside pawns and creating new tactical possibilities. Safeguarding the king's escape route and preparing to challenge the open file opens up new possibilities. A probing advance, seeking active placement for the bishop after its recent repositioning. The rook swings across, aiming to infiltrate black's vulnerable queenside structure and exploit the weak pawns. Restoring knight mobility frees up the c-pawn for onward advance, while setting up a potential outpost on d5. Leveraging open files, the rook aggressively infiltrates black's position, threatening further disruption. Trading pieces here simplifies the position, which may favor black's slightly worse pawn structure. Recapturing the bishop opens the e-file, creating a significant dynamic advantage for white's rooks. Pushing the pawn forward opens lines and creates an ambitious pawn majority on the king side, but also weakens the king's shelter. Centralizing the monarch offers a new avenue for white's attack and consolidates its presence in the core of the board. Aggressively pushing pawns forward creates immediate complications, but risks overextending and exposing the king side. Shifting the king's shelter and preparing to contest the vital open file ahead. The black king cautiously steps away from the open d-file, seeking shelter behind its pawns. Opening the king's position with g4 might be a desperate attempt to create counterplay. This pawn capture opens a diagonal for the bishop and disrupts white's kingside pawn shield, potentially creating weaknesses. Opening the h-file now forces black to defend their vulnerable king. Pushing the pawn aims to create attacking chances on the queen side, but could weaken the pawn chain. King centralization becomes paramount to activate your remaining pieces and control the center. Re-establishing control of the file with the rook offers a potential outpost for the knight and pressures white's queen side. Knight activation to the center could stir up this quiet pawn structure. Pushing the passed pawn forward, seeking to disrupt white's coordination and create immediate pressure. Knight centralization on c5 activates this piece for central control and potential forays. Creating a passed pawn is the goal, but opening your king this way to the rook's aggression feels precarious. Sacrificing the rook for tempo is a desperate attempt to disrupt black's imposing pawn wall. The king abandons its sanctuary, venturing into a perilous open space where discovery attacks lie in wait. Promoting the pawn offers a clear path to victory and forces a desperate response from black. Seizing the passed pawn ignites an urgent chase for the white king. Forking the king and rook is a classic way to force material gain in such a critical endgame. King relocation seems like a prudent step, seeking shelter behind the pawn shield before the inevitable checks. Forcing the enemy king into a corner now opens up lines for a swift finish. The king seeks refuge in the corner, but the exposed position offers little solace from the relentless queen hunt. King hunt initiated. This audacious knight fork will shatter black's defenses and likely lead to a swift conclusion. The king ventures into a precarious square, hoping to evade the impending storm of checks. Sacrificing the knight opens lines and chases the black king into a dangerous, exposed position. Abandoning the king's safety proves costly, as the knight penetrates and threatens immediate mating combinations. Delivering a decisive blow, the knight now hunts the exposed black king, forcing mate. The king sprints from shelter, hoping to escape the inevitable squeeze, but white's knight holds the decisive outpost. Forcing the king further into the corner, preparing to sweep up the remaining pawns and simplify to a winning endgame. The king desperately seeks refuge, but finding safety on this fractured board is proving nearly impossible. Capturing the pawn fundamentally alters the material balance, pushing towards a decisive endgame advantage. The king's exposure is now the paramount concern, as a new queen enters the fray. Forcing the queen to a less active square frees up white's king to pursue the pawn. A desperate check to disrupt white's overwhelming material advantage and king march. Unleashing a knight to control vital squares opens up attacking avenues. King's life hangs by a thread as the queen's mating net tightens, forcing evasive maneuvers. Foreshadowing the king's escape, the rook shifts to a more dynamic role, eyeing potential checks and defensive maneuvering. Recognizing the unavoidable checkmate and seeking a final flourish before resignation. Drives the pawn forward, aiming to force promotion by clearing the path and creating a decisive zugzwang. The black king, exposed and cornered, faces a swift mate threat. This check only delays the inevitable checkmate sequence. Unleashing a decisive check, the knight drives the black king into a mating net. The king's shelter disintegrates as this check forces a critical repositioning, potentially exposing the monarch to further danger. Unleashing a decisive attack on the queen's escape route, the king marches to safety.